Grace and peace. Welcome to Judah's Roar Domestic Violence Awareness Initiative YouTube channel. I am your host, Apostle Cheryl. Now, before we get started, take a quick look down here below the video. Make sure you tap that subscribe button if you've not done so already, and then read further to discover other ways that you can partner with us on our quest to eradicate domestic violence. Today's topic is the DV empathy trap, the domestic violence empathy trap. Okay, let's get started. Empathy and sympathy are not the same thing. Did you know that? Empathy and sympathy are not the same thing. And often they're used interchangeably, but they are, in fact, processes in their own right. So they are individual processes. All right, let's take a closer look at this. Experiencing sympathy for someone does not connect us to them. It's kind of viewing their struggle, viewing their challenge, and feeling concerned for them, but it does not necessarily spur us to action or spur us to involvement. Okay, it doesn't cause us or serve as a catalyst for action or for intervention. Empathy as a process involves us identifying with the pain and suffering or struggle of another. And so we identify there's more of a personal connection there. So sympathy can be defined as feelings for someone and their situation. And empathy is more accurately described as feelings with someone. So when we are in an empathic mode, we identify a pain or a struggle. We feel it with the individual who is dealing with it and who is struggling with it. Now, what does this have to do with domestic violence? Oftentimes, victims get sucked into this empathy trap. And by that, I mean, if they are experiencing abuse, the abuser may very well apologize. The abuser may have experienced abuse earlier in their life or some traumatic experience, and they state that this is the reason that they behave the way that they do. What this does in a victim oftentimes is it triggers literally a chemical release in the brain, and a hormone, oxytocin, is released into the brain, right? When we hear this story and we identify and feel along with them, this chemical is released into the brain, and it's kind of known as the cuddle hormone. It's the one that makes you feel nurturing and makes you, want to understand and causes you to want to fix everything and make it better. Okay, so there's a chemical reason that victims respond to these really sad stories that may or may not be true when the victim is told by the abuser what causes their behavior. That's if the abuser even acknowledges that their behavior is inappropriate. Okay, so what have we established so far? That empathy and sympathy are not the same thing. They're two separate processes. Sympathy involves feeling for someone, feeling badly for them, that they have experienced what they have experienced or that they are enduring what has confronted them in life. And empathy is feeling it with them. Now, too much of anything is unhealthy. Okay, too much of anything is unhealthy. And it's something that the Lord revealed to me many years ago, and I discussed it in one of my books, is that our weaknesses are simply our strengths that are applied inappropriately. What does that mean? It means that the thing that makes you susceptible to victimization, if it were present in your life in the proper volume, in the proper amount, used in an appropriate manner under appropriate circumstances, it would be a tremendous strength. What am I saying? That weakness, if it were regulated and moderated appropriately, would be a tremendous strength. And so what happens in abuse is that that strength is exploited by the abuser. And now everything is thrown out of balance. And so many times we'll pride ourselves on being empathic. I'm very empathic. I feel people's pain, and especially those people who are prophets, who are prophetic, who are deeply spiritual people. Often we are that in tune with another person's pain. We can actually feel in our body what they're feeling. We can experience it with them. Um, Now, this is good if it's used to inform how you interact with this individual going forward or how you can help going forward. But it's not good if you get swallowed up in it, right? So if it's not regulated, if it's not moderated, it becomes a tremendous problem, and it becomes a tool in an abuser's hands that they can skillfully use to manipulate the victim. Okay. So again, sympathy is what we feel for someone, and empathy is what we feel with someone. Now, neuroscientists have determined that seeing someone in pain activates the part of our brains that register pain. So there's a scientific reason why we can feel these things and get pulled into them. Okay. There's science that supports that. Psychologists Jean Dissetti and Klaus Lamb suggest that empathy is comprised of not only emotion sharing, but executive control that regulates and modulates the experience. That means that we're not just this mass of feelings if we have developed in a healthy fashion emotionally. Okay. There are two forms of attachment that I want to talk about briefly in this video. One is the avoidantly attached. The individual that is avoidantly attached, that means that they've experienced something in life or they've experienced something in childhood, and this is how it manifests in their life. The avoidingly attached individual is not comfortable in intimate settings and struggles to recognize their emotions or those of others. So, someone who is avoidantly attached struggles to identify what they're feeling and what others are feeling. Okay. The anxiously attached may lack the ability to moderate their own emotions and may be swept up into someone else's emotions. This is not empathy. This is being anxiously attached. This means that the boundaries that were they in place, healthy boundaries, would allow you to even feel with someone their pain and their suffering, but have a healthy sense of when to pull back and how far to go. And so there's no sensation of being swept away with it. You're able to acknowledge, if you're healthy, that they're enduring pain and suffering, that it is unjust, and that something needs to be done. But you don't need to be treated for depression because of something someone else is experiencing. Okay, so if you're able to self regulate and to moderate, you understand how close to get to that. You are able to identify how far you can go and remain healthy and respect those boundaries. So, again, the avoidantly attached struggle to identify their own emotions and the emotions of others, and the anxiously attached struggles to differentiate between their emotions and the emotions of others. They get pulled in and sucked into a place where it's unhealthy. Now, am I saying that being empathic is bad? No, I'm not. I'm saying that everyone is born with the ability, rather, to develop empathy. And much of this is taught, care and concern for others. But if you've had a turbulent childhood, or if you have not developed properly in that area, you may come out skewed one way or the other in terms of how you interact with others who are struggling. Okay. Now, with empathy, you may actually feel physically in your body the stress, the angst, the fear, the anxiety, even the sadness of those that you are interacting with in your own body. But you are able to regulate that. You're able to step away. You're able to identify within yourself, hey, this is getting to be too much. I need an outlet. I need to not be as involved. I need to manage or handle this a completely different way. Okay. Unregulated empathy can lead to concentrations of cortisol. This is another chemical reaction. Concentrations of cortisol, making it difficult to release emotion. So, an inability to regulate your degree of involvement triggers a release of a hormone that makes it even more difficult to release that emotion. This is why oftentimes, when we're trying to help others, if we are not careful, if we're not respecting our own personal boundaries, etc., that we can get pulled into a place where they may feel better because they've shared their burden with you. They've shared it, they've released it. You've caused them to feel better. You've heard them, you've validated them, and they've gone off the road and they're fine. And now you're crashing and burning behind them. Okay. And so self care is important. And a huge part of self care is being able to identify and recognize your own limitations and understanding that it's okay to have them. We all have them. So it's important to know what they are. Okay. So when this cortisol is released, when this hormone is released, it causes us to struggle with releasing that emotion, and it can lead to depression, it can lead to anxiety for the person who started off being the helper, right? So if you don't know how to manage it or handle it, it can consume you. All right, it can lead to burnout. um, how do you know that you're not handling it well? So here's one indication: you feel compelled to fix the whole entire situation single-handedly if necessary. You feel compelled to do it. There's an inability to detach and step away. You may even struggle with accepting that it's the victim's responsibility, right, to make a decision about whether to remain in that relationship or to exit that relationship, and when and how that should happen. Um, if you're the victim and you have a difficult time, every time the abuser mentions their horrible childhood, the fact that they were dropped on their head at birth, the fact that maybe their father wasn't there or their mother was in prison or no one understands them but you, and that those hormones get secreted in the brain, okay, and then trauma bonding kicks in as well, it becomes a trap. It becomes the reason that you can't leave. It becomes the reason that you can't detach. And it becomes the reason that you have a difficult time discerning when you are in over your head in terms of trying to help the person who is destroying you and who may ultimately kill you. Okay. When we've gone too far, when we have ignored all the signals that this is too much and maybe, I've helped as much as I can, or I'm sorry that you were treated that way as a child, but that does not make it okay for you to treat me the way you're treating me right now. One of the ways that we can tell is that we aren't comfortable allowing people, even the abuser, to be responsible for their own actions. Totally, period. You'll know that you're not in a healthy place if you struggle with just accepting that this is a hot mess. They're the only ones that can change it. Um, and I can't help them with that. That's something they're going to have to do alone. And it's not something that they should be doing to try to hold on to me, because then that's just further manipulation. Okay. The capacity for empathy varies from person to person, and there are a lot of things that impact that. Um, and something else that I've learned is that a person can have what you need, but they have to be able, and willing to release it to you. Able and willing. So empathy can be developed if we choose to develop and if we are intentional about it. But we can be just as intentional about not extending it. And as a matter of fact, refusing to extend empathy, even for some narcissists, it's not that they don't have it. Many of them have it and they weaponize it. They choose to not release it, or they release it at opportune times for them to further their manipulation. According to the DSM-5, which was published in 2013, one of the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder is lacks empathy, namely, is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. Being unwilling to empathize is not the same thing as being unable to do so. So sometimes, even if we understand that the abuser is a narcissist, we assume that they can't feel. We assume that they feel nothing. When in fact, they may very well be feeling many things and choosing when to exhibit it in terms of furthering their hold in the life of a victim. People with narcissistic pathology know how to invoke feelings of insecurity and anxiety in their partners, and in turn, then provoke attachment anxiety. They provoke that anxiety that serves as a catalyst for being confused about when to pull back. See how that works? It's important. It's important to note, especially if you're someone who has a friend or a loved one who's a victim and you want to be helpful. You can know that maybe you're struggling yourself personally with appropriate boundaries if you intrude upon them with your advice and with your opinions. Once you've stated your position or your opinion, in a healthy person, that's enough. And you're able to recognize, although it may cause you distress, but you're able to recognize and to respect the fact that the victim has to determine what is best in their life. And they, in fact, have a right to do so. Okay. If you find yourself repeating your position, repeating your thoughts, repeating your concerns, trying to convince them uh, to do what you think should be done, it's really no different than what the abuser does to them. But it's also an indication that maybe you have become uh, overridden with anxiety concerning the situation, and you might need to distance yourself a bit to ensure self care. Okay. Now, what I want you to remember is this: we hear a sad story, sometimes, especially as victims, you hear a sad story and you feel compelled to help. You feel compelled to understand. You feel compelled to identify with their pain. And a compelling story is a great vehicle for this. Remember that it triggers that caretaker thing on the inside of us. It triggers that nurturing thing, and it's oxytocin is known as the cuddle hormone. Okay, so it makes you want to nurture and protect and undergird and build up and all of that. But be very, very careful that the empathy that you are feeling is not out of control, that it is not out of bounds. The Bible states that a man who has no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls. A man that has no rule over his own spirit is like a city who is broken down and without walls. And if you don't have walls, then anything can come in, right? Anything can come in. It doesn't have to ask your permission. It doesn't have to wait for you to give it access. It can run in and out as it pleases. And so when we fall into the domestic violence empathy trap, that's what I call it, we are being led not only by our emotions, but by the emotions of others. And we are failing to regulate and to modulate that within ourselves. Thank you for spending time with us today. You be safe out there. It's our prayer that this video has been helpful. Blessings to you.